me see here. Because when church leaders tell you, this is not okay, and you see it written in black and white, what you think you see written in black and white, it's really hard to buck that. You feel like you're the only person, because nobody admits it in the church. They disagree. They don't really have any room for that. So it just keeps people really isolated who don't agree with that. Okay, so, and the thing that I knew is that Jesus does not deal with multi-layered issues, human issues, by summarily dismissing them. He never did that. And so I knew there was something wrong in taking that approach. Okay, now here's what you have to understand for Christians. They're taught from as young as they start going to church, from Sunday school on, they're taught that the Bible is a book about morality, that it's a book about behavior, and it's not. It's a book about a relationship. It's a book about identity. And all of Christianity, if you base it on morality, you're going to miss the whole thing. But when you base it on a relationship and an identity, who am I in relation to God, that's where the whole point is. And that's what we find in Jesus. He was a picture of what it is to know God. And his only harsh words to people were to people who were committed to following every rule, but they had no love, no compassion, no justice, no tenderness. So, we're on the right side of this. I'm just here to tell you that. And if you understand that to view Christianity and the Bible as all about morality, it begins to make sense why otherwise loving, compassionate people will become harsh, judgmental critics. And you can begin to understand why it's so important to follow the rules. If morality is the base, then following the rules are the whole deal. That's the whole point. And so it's easy to get twisted out of shape about not only your own foibles, your own sin, but other people's too. Why should anybody else care about other people's sin? But if they see the whole point as being morality, then that's why they're so twisted about it. But it's not. That's missed the point. And even worse is they don't know they're driven. They don't even know what drives them to be so staunch on something that isn't even their issue. So we're torn. So there are people torn between a lifetime of ingrained beliefs and no way to address it, and then someone close to them who's LGBTQ, a child, a sibling, someone they know and love, and they just can't understand it. Okay, well, I'm gonna explain how this happens. In the Bible is a story about Job. Have you heard the story of Job? And he's used over the millennia as the example of tragedy and being put upon in a really tough time, suffering. We always refer to Job. Well, Job had some friends who said, you have secret sin. If you will just admit your secret sin, then these troubles will go away. And they insisted, and they insisted, and they insisted. And in the end, God vindicated him and said, he doesn't have any secret sin, and you're way off on this. God said to his friends. So I don't know if anybody of you have people who are saying about you or your loved one that there's a sin and it needs to be reconciled and dealt with. Have you ever maybe heard that from anybody?
I heard it growing up.
Okay.
About a woman who was confined to the state mental hospital for a short period of time, and that she would just get right with God.
Yes.
And she was in church doing everything everybody else was,
Right.
so that was very confusing for me to know.
Yes, yes. And we can say it about anybody that doesn't fit inside the box that we think is right. And of course, I'm sure as LGBTQ, you've heard it a lot on that score. So I just want you to know, in addition, that over this issue, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people are leaving the church over this issue. We went to an Episcopalian church in Austin. We've never been Episcopalian. We've always been evangelical. And the pastor there said, yeah, we're looking to have our music to accommodate all the evangelicals we're getting who are leaving over this issue. Well, that's really interesting. They're leaving in droves because they understand this isn't right. It's just not right. Okay, so to think that Christianity means you have to turn your back on your child or your loved one, or you have to turn your back on God, that's really the dilemma that they're being faced with. So how do we do that? Because that's not a right dilemma. God gave us our children, our loved ones to love. Jesus said, love God, love others. But he never said, except this group of people, whatever group it is. Right now, it's gays. That was never an exclusionary clause. So how many of you have felt torn by this very dilemma? Yeah. Okay. All right, well, here's what this comes down to an issue of. It's between law and grace. Have you heard those two words juxtaposed? Law and grace. Okay. I'm going to talk about those two things because that's really what the issue is. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So the law, if you view Christianity as all about morality, then the law is pretty critical. The law is what tells you what's moral. And you got to do what's moral if you're a good Christian, if you believe Christianity is about morality. So the law is basically a to-do list, right? It's a do-don't list. So I'm going to draw up here. We're going to make a list. This is what we do: love others, read the Bible, pray, help the poor, feed the hungry, and we can make this whole list of what you do as a moral law, okay? And what you don't do: you don't hate, you don't murder, don't steal, okay? We've got a list over here. So that's our moral law. We've just written out, and it can go on, to infinity. Now, if I draw a little trunk here and some branches and leaves, what have we got now? What is that? It's got a trunk and it's got some leaves. It's a tree. And there's a particular tree talked about in the Garden of Eden. Tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Hold on to that thought. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, that's exactly what the moral law is. This is good and this is evil. Do you remember that God had something to say about that tree?
Don't touch it.
Don't eat from it. Don't eat from it. That's exactly right. And that's the tree that Adam and Eve ate from. Okay, but God said, don't eat from that tree. All right, why would he say that? If that's all the information about what's good and what's evil, why did he say that?
He didn't want people to know.
Yeah, he didn't want people to know. Why not?
If I don't know, I can't be ever in a dilemma about what's right and what's wrong.
Okay,
Keep the innocence.
well, yes. And that's a good word for that, to keep the innocence. And I'll tell you how that fits in, because that's exactly right. He doesn't want us to be determining what's right and what's wrong in our own knowledge and our own wisdom, because we're not equipped for it. I can't tell you that what you're doing and your decisions you're making are right or wrong. I'm not equipped for that. I'm not equipped for that with my children. I'm really not. I mean, there's some rearing that you do and teaching them, but I can't make decisions for their life for them, and much less anybody else. I can't even really understand what's right and what's wrong for me forever. I need help with that. I need God's help with that. But especially to tell other people what's right and what's wrong, I am not equipped to eat off this tree. Why do people want to eat off this tree? Because it gives them something to do. It gives them something to feel good about.
The snake told him.
The snake told him.
Somebody else's fault.
Yeah, and it's very easy to say, okay, I did my list. It said do this and don't do that. Did it, done, check. I'm going to go out and have it, go out, do what I want now. Because I've already kept the rules. And it keeps it very task-oriented. But there's no relationship in that. We'll get to that in a second. There are a couple of other reasons that we want to eat off that tree. Then we get control and we get judgment. I get to control things off this tree, and I get to decide things. And it's kind of a little bargain with God too. If I do these things, He's going to keep me safe, right? And if I'm in a non-affirming church tradition, He won't put any gays in my family either, because that doesn't happen when you keep the rules well. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the thinking about it. Well, what's the alternative? If that's how people view the whole of Christianity and the Bible, then what's the alternative to that? It's over here in the word grace. There's another tree in the garden that you already said. What's the tree the other tree in the garden?
Tree of life.
The tree of life. What did God say about that tree? Eat from that tree. Eat from the tree of life. That's the tree to eat from. Now, the tree of life represents grace. And grace is a word. Have you heard the word grace? Okay. Grace is a word we use, we misuse all the time. We hear it like, okay, well, you screwed up on all these rules, and I don't understand how you can be thinking that way, but we're going to give you grace. It's like a free pass because you messed up on this tree. That's not it at all. It's not on that tree. Grace comes from the word, it's the word charis and the word Christ. It's the same root. It really means the power of God. So it's not law versus a free pass on the law. It's law versus the power of God. And that's what the tree of life is all about. We get to have the power of God in our lives. That's the point of Christianity. That was the point of Jesus coming here on earth, to show the power of God. Okay? So when you eat off this tree, there's still things that are right and wrong. Like, I really need to be kinder to my husband, the Lord told me a couple of years ago, and be more sacrificial. But that came from the tree of life. So that was something that He showed me in relationship. When decisions are made on this tree, then it's in relationship, and I understand it, and I say, oh yeah, I was really selfish. I do need to apologize to him. There's hope and there's life in that. When it's over here, it's like, well, good wives do this and they don't do that, and I'm like, okay, but there's no joy and there's no life. Okay, but the fruit of the Holy Spirit is joy and life and peace and patience and gentleness and kindness and self-control. All of those things come naturally within the relationship. But if you don't understand that, then you're left with just the rules. And that there's an expression among parents that says rules without relationship equals rebellion. And you can see that. Of course, these are all the things you do. What's the first thing you do when you see a sign that says wet paint on a park bench? You test it, don't you? That's the natural result of rules. They draw you into rebellion, unless there's relationship. If you're with somebody that said, look, I just painted this bench, it's probably still a little wet, but look, then, it's a whole different take on it than don't sit on this bench. So that's what I see the non-affirming church as having really gotten distracted from. And the church over the millennia has done that. When you eat off this tree, you get things like the Salem witch trials. And you get things like the Crusades. You get things like how you kicking your son out of the house because he's gay. You get how the non-affirming church has dealt with this issue overall, right? And it's death. And the Bible says that the law is death, equals death. It leads to death. It doesn't lead to life. The law is like a mirror that shows you how you can't keep the rules and you need this tree. That's all the law is for. And Paul, who wrote the letters in the New Testament, said that the law is a tutor to point you to Christ. In those days, a slave would take the wealthier boys and lead them to the rabbi to be taught. So once the slave has done that, then the slave is not needed anymore because he's with the rabbi. And that's what Paul was saying about the law. The law is not needed anymore. Once you come to Christ, then you got the tree of life. And you said innocence too. And that's also what this tree represents, because then I go to God innocently and I say, what do I do in this situation? I don't know. You know, my son wants to move out and he's so young. What do you think about that? And he guides me, right? That's how a relationship works. And that's what Jesus offers us. Jesus did not come on earth so that he could make immoral people moral. He came so that dead people could be alive. There's a lot of difference in that, isn't there? Yeah. Okay. Let me see what I might have, and okay. So let me give you an example of what that really can look like. Let's say my husband said, honey, I've been looking at our marriage vows, and I see that it tells us we promised to be faithful, no affairs. So you know what? Being reminded of that, I've decided I'm not going to have an affair. Versus, honey, I am so crazy about you. The thought of anybody else, I just wouldn't even occur to me because I love you so much. Okay, that's a difference in law and grace, isn't it? In life and death. And that's what we all want. We all want that life. Let me see what else Okay, and the other thing I want to talk about is there's a lot of talk about scriptures. Has anybody been stumbled over the scriptures on this? There are like 6 verses. Okay. Well, I want to put that in perspective. The Bible has this many verses in it, 31,000 verses. And it has this many that talk in any way about homosexuality or same-sex anything. And it has this many that talk about a monogamous, long-term, committed relationship of the same sex. So really, the concept isn't even in the Bible. So to get sidetracked by this many verses, it's 6 or 7, depending on your interpretation, that could even be construed that way, is really a red herring, because it's not even what we're talking about. It's not even the long-term committed love relationship. It's a lot more about idol worship, temple sex practices, and raping of slave boys. So, you know, that's a pretty different situation than 2 people who are in love and want to get married who are the same gender. Those are really different conversations. But if you live off this tree, then it's easy to pick out anything and stick with it as all important when it missed the whole overall view. Does that make sense? You're grasping what I'm saying here?
Yes.
So, thank you. And so even to debate from it, even to get caught up in that debate, is to eat from the wrong tree. When my son was little, I would fall into debates with him without meaning to. He'd have all the Legos out, and I'd say, okay, it's time to go to the store. I need to take you with me, so you need to put away your Legos. But Mom, you said I could play. They're like lawyers in training. They're 6 years old. They know the law. You said I could play for 20 minutes. It's only been 10 minutes. And I'm, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, my husband had to enlighten me on this. He said, as soon as you step into that, well, blah, 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 and you get into the debate with them, he said, then we have 2 6-year-olds because you're on the same level as him. And instead, you don't even enter that debate. It's not worthy of the debate. It's to say, I really need you to put those away because we really need to go. Now, it's not that you can't provide understanding, and in the car on the way, say, I know I cut the time short, but our appointment was moved up, and so, sorry about that. But that's a different conversation once he's already done it and you're in the car than when you get into a debate with a 6-year-old. It's like a labyrinth, you'll never get out. Okay, but that's what those getting caught up in any particular verses can look like. It's like a labyrinth you'll never get out of. And Paul talks about disputable issues. And this is a disputable issue. I mean, there are people I've talked to who feel convicted in their heart that God has told them not to pursue any more same-sex relationships. I've talked to those people. One woman who said whenever she broke up with her girlfriend, she'd become so depressed and suicidal that with the last one, the Lord said, you're going to succeed if you continue. You really need to stop this. It was her personal conviction. And I was in no way going to argue with that. And I heard Nan say the same thing about relationships and has chosen celibacy. Okay, I have nothing to say about that. But I have a lot of people I've talked to who don't feel so convicted, who don't think there's anything wrong with it. Neither can I tell them, yeah, it is wrong, you just don't know. God's convicting you, you just don't know it. That's not my place to say at all. So there's an example in the Bible where there's a disputable issue, and it has to do with meat that's been sacrificed to idols. It was a very important thing in the day. But Paul said, don't get caught up in disputable issues. If your heart is convicted that you shouldn't eat that idol worship meat, don't eat it for the sake of your conscience. If it's not, go ahead and eat it. There's nothing wrong with it. And in my prayer, one of the things that emerged has been this, excuse me, that this too is a disputable issue. People are disputing it. So it's a dispute, and they're validly disputing it. So I call it a disputable issue. And so we don't really need to get involved in that. There's no win in that kind of situation. All right, let me see. And I have an example of law and grace in how it can be treated with a child who comes out to you. And I had 2 letters to read to you. One of them was about the dad rejecting the child, but you've probably heard that kind of letter. So I'm not going to read that. Just, you're not my son anymore. Don't come back, Dad. You don't need me to read one like that. But I'm going to read the other one. And it says, Nate, I overheard your phone conversation with Mike last night about your plans to come out to me. The only thing I need you to plan is to bring home OJ and bread after class. I've known you were gay since you were 6. I've loved you since you were born. Dad. P.S. Your mom and I think you might make a cute couple. Okay, that's from this tree. That's all the difference in the world. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying that, oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I've got something going on. Excuse me one second. All right. You may still have 1,000 questions in your head. I don't know what your questions were when you came in, and I will take your questions, but I don't expect you to have no questions at all, and it can be still confusing. But the answers are out there. The thing is to eat from the tree of life and let Him show you. That's all that's needed. You don't even have to answer the questions from people at your church or your pastor. God said, worship me, don't worship your pastor. There's a lot of pastor worship today. A lot of nodding heads, yeah. That, he said it, so it is true. And the church agrees with it. But that's all from this tree. And there's a lot of fear associated with this tree. I'm going to blog on the title is God in a Box, because we like to fit God in this box, and things that don't fit, that hang off, like gay people in a Christian family, so we just lop it off, and then our God fits. But if God fits in our box, then it's not God. And God did not put you on earth to keep a list of rules. That I promise. That's not the goal of being on earth, is to keep the rules well. It's to have life, and abundant life. And Jesus said, I'll give you life, abundant life. And that's being free to be who God designed you to be, and moving forward in that. So the pot at the end of this rainbow journey is knowing God personally and being free in Him, and not feeling like you have to make anybody else happy by answering their questions. You know what I'm saying? So, and if you're on this journey and it's your personal journey, you're doing just fine, because it's your journey. So that's what I've got, and I'd love to take any questions you might have.